Is a former advisor at the office of Netanyahu and a senior contributing editor at the Jewish News Syndicate. Welcome to First Edition.
Thanks for having me.
Ruthie, what's happening in Israel right now? The efforts to strike a deal picked up speed last week, Hamas dropping a key demand, but also renewing its call for a permanent ceasefire. Netanyahu has vowed to keep fighting, though, until Hamas is eliminated. Your thoughts?
Okay, so first of all, let's not be fooled by Hamas. It didn't exactly remove one of its key conditions. What it did was say that a complete ceasefire and withdrawal of all Israeli troops is no longer a condition even to sit down to talk. All right, that's an important distinction here, because Hamas has not agreed to return all the hostages, has not agreed to anything other than negotiating. And you might think that's important, and I know that Netanyahu says, okay, so we'll negotiate, but we're not going to give up on the main goals of the war, especially since that won't return all the hostages.
Mm-hmm. Ruthie, we were hearing a lot about the negotiations between Hamas and Israel during the presidential debate, and clearly Joe Biden is taking a stance that he wants to move forward with this ceasefire. What do you make of Joe Biden and Netanyahu's relationship at this time, and how the United States has supported Israel in its efforts?
Well, I think that Netanyahu has been overly friendly to Joe Biden since for the last year and a half. I don't think it's deserved, but I suppose it's necessary given Israel's status in relation to the United States. Now, the reason I say that is because when the war broke out, suddenly Biden, who had been snubbing Netanyahu, didn't invite him to the White House, etc., suddenly said, oh my God, this awful thing happened, and he even came to visit Israel, Biden. Now, as soon as the dust settled after a couple of weeks after this horrific massacre and abduction of 250 people, among them American citizens, the Biden administration began to say to Netanyahu and to the Israeli government, okay, so fine, now you bombed a few places. Now don't go into a ground invasion. Now, try not to kill anybody. If you're going, we know you have to respond to this horrific thing that happened to you, but just don't kill anybody in the process. And from that moment on, Netanyahu has been delicately trying to show the Biden administration that our war is necessary for our safety and existence, since there are 7 fronts going on attacking us at one time here. And also this all came to a head a couple of weeks ago when Netanyahu revealed that the Biden administration was withholding arms shipments to Israel.
So let's shift the gears a little bit, and let's talk about the hardline president-elect of Iran. How could his election shake up regional and global politics?
Okay, well, interesting. You said the hardline election, the hardline president. Actually, people are referring to him as some kind of reformist these days. And I did want to point out that it doesn't really matter who the president of Iran is when the Ayatollah-led regime runs the show. And Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, really, he dictates policy. He's the boss of the president, no matter who the president actually is. So what I would say is that the reason he was selected by the Supreme Leader is to pull the wool over the West's eyes, to show that Iran is actually undergoing some kind of reform, which it is not.
Right. How do you think ultimately, though, this will affect the Middle East and moving with Netanyahu moving forward to try to bring back all the hostages? I mean, many are saying there's still over 100 hostages left. What do you think the next, how this election will affect the next phase in the war? And clearly, Israel is still seeing Hezbollah and other terror groups attack practically every day.
Correct. Well, you see, Iran is behind all of this. Iran is behind the Hamas attacks. Iran is behind the Hezbollah attacks. Iran is behind the Houthis from Yemen. Iran is funding and arming terrorists in the West Bank. So Iran plays a pivotal role here. Now, short of Israel actually attacking Iran itself, the best we can do in Israel is to keep fighting on the fronts that are immediately along our borders and hope that the U.S. administration grasps that this is really a regional and global war and that the U.S. and Europe are also targets. So, this isn't only Israel's war, this is a wider war, and Iran is the head of the snake. I would have hoped, I can't possibly hope this from the Biden administration, which is a clone of the Obama administration. But, I had hoped that at some point the United States would have woken up and bombed Iran's nuclear facilities. Iran has to be weakened in every way possible, and its protesters have to be supported. Another thing that both administrations refused to do is help the poor Iranians who are trying to get out from under the grip of the Ayatollahs.
With regard to the Israelis who are speaking out against Netanyahu, is it that they see that there's probably no chance to reach a deal to bring, or should say return, the hostages? Because if Hamas is saying that, unless there's a permanent ceasefire, they're not going to release them. And then Netanyahu is saying that even with this ceasefire, we will continue at some point in the future to move forward to wipe out Hamas. Maybe perhaps they're saying, unless we can actually get a permanent deal and broker some type of peace, we're not going to get the 100 hostages home. Is that how they see it?
Well, I'll tell you, there are several different types of demonstrators in Israel, and it's a bit confusing. But I will say, first of all, they are not as numerous as they appear on television. They actually are dwindling in numbers. There is a core group of anti-Netanyahu protesters who have been protesting him all along, and it has nothing to do with October 7th or the hostages. It's the same group of anti-Netanyahu people who have been at him for years. Now, last year, right before October 7th, there were protests in the streets against the government's plan to reform the judicial system here. That's what the majority of Israelis voted for, but the minority of vociferous protesters took to the streets and claimed that it was going to be an end to democracy. Does that sound familiar to you guys in the U.S.? Warnings about the end of democracy by a certain leader. Well, this core group of protesters continued with their anti-Netanyahu rhetoric after October 7th, and some of them latched on to the families of the hostages to cynically use their horrific plight as yet another element in their protests. Not all the families of the hostages agree on how it's best to bring them back. And so when you see these protesters and you think that everyone here just doesn't agree with Netanyahu's policy about how to get them back, that's not true.
It's certainly, the media has spun it that way, at least here in the States. Ruthie Blum, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
And thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. We'll have a live report from Daniel Cohen in Israel.